Hello, my name is Hawker, and today I'll be showing an alternative ways to upload your manuals to the manual pages. Now, most way people will tell you is to zip your manual and put it in repo requests, and then wait for a maintainer to handle it. That is fine if you really don't want to get into the weeds of actually putting your manual inside the repository, which is contain content. It's totally fine if you don't want to do that, but for people who don't want to wait as long for maintainers to get to it, you can make their lives a little bit easier by doing some of the work for them, which is what I'll be covering today. So, just to get started, you should have a GitHub account. Assuming that you're a manual creator, you probably do, and you probably have your mod already on GitHub. So, assuming that you have one, if not, then make one already. You then want to create a fork of this repository. And in basic terms, a fork is basically a copy of the repository, so you can do your own thing and then send the changes to the main fork, which is Timwee's. So you want to hit this button here and hit create new fork. I already have one, which is why it's right here. So we're just going to go to my fork. And first thing, anytime you are about to make any changes, whether you're a contributor, a maintainer, whatnot, you want to always make sure your fork is up to date with the main repository, which you can easily do by pressing the sync button right here. Okay, and now I'm going to be opening this in Visual Studio Code. You can I think you can use Visual Studio. I never have, but I'm just gonna use Visual Studio Code. Um, just some disclaimer: this is not going to be a HTML, JS, or CSS, JS tutorial. I'm going to be assuming that you have basic knowledge of that. Um, there are many tutorials that you can use in order to look that up, and there is also a tutorial manual. If you go to the repository manual pages, hit more, and then hit template manual, you'll see an HTML file called tutorial, in which will tell you a little bit about HTML. That's mainly for making manuals. It's not that difficult. You can always just Google if you need to learn something. Moving on, I'm using GitHub desktop to keep setting my changes. You can use any other version control that you want, but anyway, we're just gonna pull this and then open it in Visual Studio Code. And just to make sure, let's go to terminal, and then we can just look to see what our most recent is. So Match Manage Interactive, is that the same? Oops. Yes, it is. So my fork is now up to date. Now we can start actually doing the requests. So when either you're a contributor or a maintainer, the steps are pretty much the same. You want to first BIP the request in order to show everyone else that you are working on it and that another person knows not to work on it at the same time. And then you just want to download the manual and just put it anywhere. Just put it here for now. Okay. This should be called Simon Sum, but whatever. It's not that big of a deal. Just gonna actually just do this per preference, doesn't really matter, but this is what it should like. You should have a folder called whatever the name of the manual is, and then inside should be the HTML and JSON folder. So when we open this up in Visual Studio, you'll see a lot of things. HTML folder is, as the name suggests, where all the HTMLs or manuals are. And so we first want to rename this so it's correct, so it should be Simon Sums HTML, and we can just drag it and drop it in there. And make sure it's in the correct place. Let me just make sure Simon Sums. Yes, it is. It's in the HTML folder. And we don't see any CSS files, no new font files. Okay, we have just a component, which is the SVG, have the correct naming convention. And then the good thing about the template is that the structure is exactly the same or simulates the actual KTANE content repository. So it's where we put the SVG is an HTML image, and then scroll down to find component, COM, and then we can just drag it and drop it in there. This is why it's very important to link your manuals and listen to Logbot when it tells you something is wrong. Otherwise, you're just gonna make your manual wait a little longer until it gets onto the page or on the repo. And there's no other images. If there were, they would be named Simon Sum, and then you would just drop it in the image folder. But there doesn't seem to be anything else, so we're good with the HTML folder. Now we just need to take the JSON, fix the name, and put it in the JSON folder. Okay. Now we have to view the manual to make sure everything else is correct. Because the linting does show us some things, but it doesn't really show us everything. Now, normally I have an extension, and when it's just an HTML file, I just use an extension called Live Server, which you can get by pressing this button right here and just typing in Live Server. But there's a lot more things we need to, and once you install it, and then it comes up right here, and it will open this what it will look like in a folder. Actually, I'll just show it right now. Better to show it than explain it. There we go. So this is what the manual looks like. It's pretty accurate, but there's a lot more things we want to see than just the HTML page. So I'm going to close out of this and show you the way you should be doing it. And that, if we look back at the KTANE content on GitHub, you can see there are instructions that tell us to install or clone this repository called KTANE Web. This is basically the server that actually hosts the content, so hence why they're two different names. And I usually just use this in Visual Studio. I don't think there's really a difference, but you just want to install it the same way. Open it in your preferred IDE, run it, and at least make sure you're running it in debug mode, which you can change by pressing it right here, as it will tell you to configure some stuff. But other than that, it will then load everything from KTANE content. You see it's getting over JSON files. And once it's done loading, then it will tell you to go to this browser or go to localhost on this port, which is 8990. So let's do 80. And it looks like a spitting image of the actual repository. But you can see that we have Simon Sums up here, which is not here. So there's some things that we need to check in order to make sure that the manual is good to be on the repository. And luckily, we do not have to remember them all. Whoops. As if you go into the server and go into repo discussion, go to pinned and go to the first pin. Luckily, Tim gave us a maintainer responsibility document, which, as the name suggests, tells us all the things we need to do in order to be a decent maintainer or a contributor. Now, it goes into a lot more detail about what you need to do and the tutorial steps in order to set up the repository. So if you want to check some things out, I would highly recommend checking it out in order to get a better understanding, as I know I'm going through a lot of things very quickly. But anyway, for new manuals, there are 9 steps that are required. Does it pass linting? Yes, it does, because if we went to repo request, we can see that logbot reacted with a thumbs up. You should, if it wasn't a request, as in, let's say you're a modder who just made your own manual, what you want to do is you want to go to logbot in DMs and then type in lint with an exclamation point at the top or at the front, and then you want to drag and drop your manual in and hit enter. If there's anything wrong with it, let's scroll up to see, then it will give you a message like this: just fix the changes, rezip your manual, and then type lint again. You can also just do it for individual files or just mainly HTMLs, and it will lint those as well. Make sure it's linted, as it will catch most of the things that is required for the, or rather desired for the manual to look like. So we know it passes linting. Are the JSON, HTML components, SVG all named after the module? Yes, because I fixed that before. So if we go back into here, into the zip, I named it so there was a space in between. You should always make it so that the name of the manual is the name of all the files. So we did fix that. What else? Oh, and there's some things that you are not allowed to put, so you can omit these characters. Are there any images? No. Any audios? No. Any JavaScript files? No. So if there were any of these things, we will put them in the appropriate folders, which are listed here. Did they accidentally put style code in main.css? Let's see. I didn't see any styling things that looked wrong. Doesn't seem like it. Since main.css is already in KTANE content, that's why I didn't put it in the repository. Copyright issues. Now, if they did have any music, which they don't, we would need to embed them in YouTube videos, but we don't need to worry about that. They don't have any fonts, so we don't have to worry about that. Does a JSON contain a symbol? Let's see. Oops, looks like... Oh, okay. Seems like the server crashed when it was trying to generate a PDF. We'll look into that in a bit. But does it contain a symbol? We can check that by... Actually, I do need the server for that. Let's just rerun it and see what happens. Okay. Sorry, so I just restarted it and went back to the original page, and it seems to be fine. We'll fix that error in a second. I feel like I understand. I think I know what's wrong with that. So, does the JSON contain a symbol? Is it unique or in 4 characters or less? We can check that by going to View, going to Periodic Table, and since it's the first manual or most recent module, it comes up here. So it does have a symbol of SSU. So let's just type in SSU, and it doesn't seem like that is taken from anything else, so that is good. Does it have any quirks? Or does it have any quirks, and do they make sense? Let's see. We could just look in the JSON for that. Doesn't seem like it. Okay. If using the ignore list, it does not. Do the links to Steam Workshop in the source code actually work? Which are, if we go back to the list view, it does not have a source code link, which would be this Unity thing right here. All you just got to do is click on it, and if it goes somewhere, then it's fine. It doesn't have that, so we just need to worry about the Steam link. And it does give us assignment sums, which is correct. So that's fine. And that's really everything you need to do here, at least for the required steps. Now, if we go back into the manual, and you see we have this exception occurring when we go inside, I think that may be because we have no SVG up here. And that is because, most likely, the name of the SVG is named Simon's Sums without the space. So I feel like if we restart the server, that should fix everything. And if we refresh, yep, I didn't get any crash. And let me just make sure by just going out and going back into the, yes. So make sure any images are named correctly, just so it doesn't mess up like that. So technically everything is done to go up onto the repository. Although there are some things that I personally like to check before I let it go up there. If you press Alt P, okay, that must be a shortcut on here. But if you press Alt P, you will be in developer mode, which seems to not show you anything. But if you, let's say, have a manual that has 2 flavor texts, you will see an error that says an element has flavor text when only one element should have a flavor text class. Sorry. And so if you have 2 of them, one of them should be comment instead. So, and you can see it's highlighted here which 2 are the elements in question. So if we rename this to comment and refresh, you can see they're still the same, but we don't have the error. The main reason why I use this mode is for, let's first just change this a little bit, just to make it a little more consistent. These are all minor things I'm doing just to make it the HTML code a little bit easier to read, but you definitely don't need to do this if you don't want to. That's fine for now. That was just bothering me. So if I were to bloat the page, just putting a lot of these tables, you can see, oh, I forgot to refresh. You can see that there's a lot of red, and this would not be here if we weren't in developer mode. And the reason for that is the server auto-generates the HTML manual into a PDF, which is 8 by 11 or 8.5 by 11. So this red means that you are outside the page boundaries, and that should be something you should fix. I generally don't know why that's not required. It should, but just keep that in mind. That any time you see red, well, not every time, but anytime you see this much red, that's a problem. It's okay to have a little bit of red. For example, I believe Kuro has some red in it. Yes, it does here and here. However, all the red is just covering empty space, so it's okay. It's considered acceptable. But if you can, try not to have too much red or exceed the page boundaries too much. If you need to add a new page, that is fine. So let's just get rid of all this. Now, another thing I personally like to do is if you have this many pages, like more than three, um, it's better to, instead of saying page one of whatever, page two of whatever, it's better to have a class that does this for you. And what I mean by that is if we go to, what's the module? Weakest link. There are these two classes called page footer, or this is class called page footer, and there's a before and after, and as you can see, it says page, and then the second one says of, and then the number of pages. So instead of writing the same thing over and over again, we can just omit it to just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if we go back to the original, to the browser, it says the number, and it says up 28 because I didn't change that, but so if we go back and change that, refresh, and there we go. Now, if we were, like I said, to move some content down to a new page, we don't have to manually change every single thing. We just need to change one number instead of however many pages we have. Now, I'm going to take the time to fix some of these indentations just so it's consistent and a little bit easier to read. If I see anything else noteworthy, I will let you guys know. Okay, so I just formatted the entire manual. You can see it's a lot more cleaner in terms of indentation. I didn't see anything that caught my eye specifically, so I'm just going to go through the checklist real quick and see if there's anything I should talk about. Punctuation. Yeah, flavor text, we just went over that. There's only one. Are there any tables inside cells that need no highlight class? I don't think so. It seems like, yeah, highlighting works fine. We don't need to go over that. Does page include 8 by 5 or 11 boundaries? Okay. I guess this is what I was talking before about the page boundaries, but it technically doesn't break anything, so that's probably why it's under recommended rather than required, but eh. Um, our images minified. We can check there. I don't think there's anything to minify besides the SVG. Yes. So if there were more images, we could use PNG Crush, or specifically PNGs for PNG Crush. As for the SVG, this website, SVG OMG, is used to clean up any excess SVG code in order to just make it smaller in size, as a lot of manuals, over 2,000 manuals, tend to become a little bloat heavy, I guess. So I usually just play around with the numbers here until this number becomes smaller. Usually, Logbot will lint or yell at you if the SVG is considered too big. But it didn't seem to. But this could be a little bit better. So let's just go through this all these options, and let's look at the original to make sure it looks fine. Yeah, so let's just download, put it in the correct place, which we can reveal, and there it is. Let's copy this, put it in there, save, and it looks exactly, it should look exactly the same, and it does, but we know it's a little bit smaller as the number here is smaller. Not by a lot, but it adds up. So turns out my recording decided to just stop for whatever reason, and that was after I finished everything. So I'm pretty much going to do everything again, but a little bit faster, just so I'm not going to cry myself to sleep tonight. So I left off after uh what was I doing? I made the SVG smaller. So SVG OMG. Okay. So images that link to other manuals must link to those images. So the example I was going, or I did use before, was plant identification and customer identification. So if we go to those manuals on the actually, let's do mask identification. It doesn't matter in this context. My point will still stand. So plant identification was one of the first manuals or identification modules that included this keyboard image, and it's used. Okay, plant mask identification doesn't use it. Let's just go back to customer identification. Other manual identification manuals use it as well, and you can see that here that the let's do scoop plant identification. The keyboard layout is in the image, the plant identification image folder, and since we want to save space, we put that same image path here. So, for example, if you were going to create a module that use Morse code, and you want to use the Morse code image, you would find that image path and put that here rather than uploading it again to the repository. So we don't really need to worry about that in this uh in this one, since there's only one image, which is the SVG. Moving on. Other modes. Does it look good in CSS or dark mode? Does it look good in dark mode, or does some stuff need dark mode CSS? I apologize. So if you press Alt W, the manual does go into dark mode, and most of this stuff is already covered in other CSS files. So if you're just using text and tables, then you really don't need to worry about this. But it's good to always check, especially if you have background colors. For example, if you had like a yellow background color, this end would not appear well. So either change the background color or make it so this end is darker color in dark mode, which I will show later in a different request. Is the indentation consistent? I don't know if I believe I did show that, or I said I was going to change the indentation, but I did. Let's go back to that manual assignment sum. So it looks good here. And you can see everything looks cleaner in the sense that any children element are indented from their parent element, and so on and so forth. And then the closing tag has the same indentation as the opening tag. What does it say? It says spaces, not tabs, which you can tell if you're using spaces when you highlight. You can also press Control A to highlight everything. And if you see these dots, then everything is indented with spaces, which I believe is something to save file size. I'm not sure specifically why. But if we were going to use tabs, let's say we did have tabs, so... Oops. Tabs will look something with like the arrows pointing to the right. Those are tabs, and you could change those by selecting everything and pressing F1. At least this is for VS Code. If you're using another IDE, I would just look it up, and you can type in convert, and then indentation, and then these two will show up. And since we want spaces, we just press enter, and everything goes back to the dots. Do the description plus tags take up more than 3 lines on the home page? Actually, that's something I missed in the original recording. So if we look back on the page, here, we can see this is the description here, and then the tags are right afterwards. And what did it say? More than 3? Okay. This takes up 3, so that's fine, but if there were, I would probably get rid of some of these things like 6 buttons, 6 colors. These tags are mainly here for if someone, for example, didn't know the name of the module and wanted to look something up. Let's just say like background. Then like this tag got caught because it has the word background in it. So it's most of the time good to add some. This is a bit too much in my opinion, but I'm not gonna stress over it. Again, it's most of this stuff is up to preference, and there's not really a quote unquote right way in this context. The required ones are you need to do these, but recommended is more of like hearsay. Not hearsay, sorry, that's not the right word, but preference. Moving on, does the SVG contain font-related code or other useless default code? Let me read this a little more just to make sure. Oh. So this is saying, like, does the SVG have things that is unnecessary? Like if you're using text, I believe the linter will tell you not to do that. I could be wrong, but I know it does tell you to do not to put certain things in SVGs. Like in this case, PNGs, as they're bloated, and just not acceptable. Most of the times, you really don't have to worry about this. The linter will take care of it for you, and if you put it through SVG OMG, you should be fine. As for above and beyond, I'm not really gonna touch it. Most of this is like very, very either I already touched it, such as the before and after thing, which I really think it should be recommended, but that's just my opinion. But they're just like just styling things just to make it a little bit neater, but not necessarily necessary. Not necessarily necessary. I'm so smart. Moving on, I think that's everything we wanted for the Simon Sums manual. So like I said, I already committed some of these things, but you would just make a commit here and make it something very short, which I just said new module, Simon Sum. If you want an example of commit names that are just small, you can just go to the KTANE content repo. Whoops. Hit commits right here, the number of commits right here, and it will take you to all the commits that have happened, and you can just read the name and why here. You can see they're not really longer than a few words. And if someone really wants to know what it is, they can just click on it. Well, okay, that's a bad example. Oh, no. If they really want to know, they can just click on it and see what files were changed. Moving on, I did do some commits just to show a few more things that a contributor can do. So there, oops, let's go back to the KTANE server. And if we go on repo requests, there is plagiarism optimized. And this is what we call an alternative manual, which is slightly different than a new manual, as the name implies, it's an alternative to a manual that already exists. So if we look at the checklist and type in alternative, we can see right here, most of the rules still apply, just like grammar checking, all that, not page boundaries, dark mode, all that still applies. But the name must be the original name, which in this case is plagiarism, and then a lowercase descriptor, which in this case is optimized, which is the same as the one here, and then in parentheses, the name of the author, which is optional. So we can either just have, in this case, module homework optimize or module homework optimize, open parentheses, timwe, html. It's important that you name the manuals like this. Otherwise, they will not show up properly on the web. And we can actually show you what it looks like on the web. If we go down to more, and you can see optimize underscore play, which is the name of the person who made it. I forgot, since I already did this, I don't need to do it again, but just to show you, you would download the manual and put it in the HTML folder, same way you did for the, if you're doing a new manual. But after you put it in, you can restart your server, and this should come up. And then you can just look in here, just again check if there's anything wrong with the manual. Go into developer mode, go through dark mode and light mode. Most times you don't really need to look at new images, as if they're, depending on the size of the manual, the alternative manual, they'll just take the original manual's SVG, which I believe, where let me show where the example is. Plagiarism. So right here, yeah, it just says image component plagiarism, which would be the same as what's in the original manual. Which, oh, you can just, yeah, see right here. One thing that I didn't catch in my original recording was the use of links, which I think should be talked about in the checklist, but I looked through and I didn't see anything related to it. So I'm going to give a brief, as brief I can be, example or of how a link should look. So normally when you go to the website, you would think that the link should be KTANE.dimwe HTML plagiarism.html, because that's usually what you give to your friends or expert diffuser, whatever. And so if I put that in here, where is plagiarism? If I put that here, this will take me to the original manual, which is the same as, oops, which, let me refresh, which is the same as this. However, that's not what I want, because I actually change how the original plagiarism manual looks. So if I open up the original manual here, you can see that I changed it so it says on the subject of keyboard mash. And I did that to show that we don't want this link to show what's on the website. We want it to show what our server has, because our server is the one that has the changes. So the link, instead of being all this, we just want it to be this. And the reason for that is what we call relative versus absolute links. An absolute link, to give you an example, is what you would think of a street address, where it has the number, the street name, the city, state, country, whatever. And if you put that into your GPS, you would always get a set of instructions that tell you how you would get to that address, regardless of where you are in the world. However, you can think of a relative link as just saying turn left. Now you know that whatever destination you're going to, turning left isn't enough information unless you're like right around the corner. And that's what we want in this case. We want to say, I want this specific file that is in my repository. And the way to give a brief example of how relative links work, Um, in this case, since we have the optimized manual in the same place as the regular manual, which is in the HTML folder, we can just say, give me the plagiarism manual, which is here. In this case, this SVG right here, we need to do a little bit more because the plagiarism SVG is not in, or at least not directly in, the HTML folder. So what we want to do is we want to actually go inside the image folder and then go, which is what this is here, because the image folder is in the same place as the HTML folder. And then we want to go one level deep into the components folder, which is right here. And then we want to go into the plagiarism, get the plagiarism SVG, which is somewhere in here. So that's how you would go if you wanted to go deeper inside of a folder or a directory, as what is normally called. If you want to go outside of a directory, you would put dot dot and then the name, and then this will basically take you out of the folder that you're in. So since this manual is inside the HTML folder, this will take us outside, which is actually the root of our folder. So you can see right here, it will take us to contain content. So technically, I could do dot dot slash HTML and then components or images and then components and then plagiarism. It's basically going out and then back in this context, but that's how you do it, which is helpful in other cases that I can't think of at the moment. I would highly just recommend looking it up or looking at other examples. I just want to show that because you should never have absolute links unless they lead to somewhere that's not something that's in the contain content repository. So if we fix that to what it should have been before, which is plagiarism.html, and then refresh, and then hit original manual, and it should take us, it takes us to the keyboard mash. That's really everything I wanted to talk about for this manual. Alternative manuals are pretty easy. Last thing I want to talk about is dark mode. So if I go to the website and not dark mode, I want to look at a newish module, diversity, and if you look at it in dark mode, it doesn't look good because it's black on black, which just doesn't appear well. To fix that, we want to make it so these are lighter, which like I said, I already did because my recording died, unfortunately. You can see here, but the way you fix it is through what we call CSS. So this is the what we want, so I'm going to comment that out and basically do all over again. So this is what we started with. And what you first want to do is add a class called .dark. And this is basically saying only apply this if the manual is in dark mode, which again you can toggle by pressing Alt-W. And then what we want is we want to say these are all images. So we want to get all of these images here, which can be done by just saying image. If these were all let's say these were all p tags, like we want to get all those, we could just say .p. But that's fine, we don't need that, so we can just say image. And then we want to basically invert it. And since this is done a lot of cases, many people has found the specific number we want to just invert things. So you just want to say filter, invert, and then 87%. And then when we refresh, looks all good. However, you'll notice that the SVG also got refreshed or inverted, which we don't want. Now, the SVG has a class that we can exclude. So we can just say colon not diagram, which is the class that the SVG has. And then we refresh. Everything's good. Dark mode isn't that difficult, at least this one wasn't, because there wasn't that many images that had a lot of edge cases. I know some I have seen some manuals that like have a lot of moving parts, that some parts need to be dark and the other parts need to be light. It just comes down to just tweaking and then just targeting things with classes or IDs. Nothing too difficult, but really you just need to remember filter, invert, and then just to target certain things with dark, and if needed, use not. I don't use not in a lot of cases, but in this case like these, it's helpful. But that's everything I want to do, at least change. This is the exact same, so I don't need that. And so I have my commits here. And so I want to put these commits onto the repo, or at least request it to be on the repo. Because again, if you are not a maintainer, you don't have push access, so you can't directly put it on the repo. A maintainer needs to at least verify your work. So let's go back to GitHub. And then go back to our repository or our fork. And we can go to the branch that we were on and hit contribute. Normally, if when you just make a push, you'll see a window here saying, oh, this branch just made a push like 3 minutes ago, and then like a button in green that says if you want to compare and pull. I haven't done a commit in over an hour, so that's why it's not there. But it's the same button as just hitting this contribute right here and say open pull requests. And a pull request in basic terms is it's a request to put your changes onto the repository. So requests aren't really that difficult. You just want to have a pretty good title that just briefly describes what everything's going on. So in this case, I can just copy and paste my commits. Personally, I don't really do commits like this, or rather PRs like this. I don't put PRs that are like this sparse in terms of relevancy, because we have a new manual and then two new manuals technically, and then a tweak. Usually I would just like put these in their own PR and then make this its own PR, but it doesn't really matter. That's just me personally. It just makes your title a bit long. As for your description, they should be a little bit better or a little bit more explanatory than the briefness of your commit names. So I would just say add new module Simon Sum. And then add alternative manual plagiarism, and then I could just copy and paste that. Again, these are all preferences, and these honestly are pretty self-explanatory, that it's rather difficult to think of decent descriptions. However, you should, on top of like putting a brief description of the what I guess what each commit does in this case, you should, or each request rather, you should also be linking the request. So you can just do copy image, or sorry, copy link. Yeah, copy message link, and just paste it right afterwards. This is just so maintainers can delete the request right after this is submitted, or this PR is approved. Approved, excuse me. You should also be reacting to the request was solved. I'm not going to in this case because that will delete the request as I'm a maintainer. but the solve just specifies that the request has already been done. If you really want to, you could also get rid of the bit, but it doesn't matter in this context. It doesn't matter either way. Just react with solve to say it's done. And then you just add the other two requests or links. Diversity and plagiarism optimize. And that, oops. And then you would just hit this button here, the create pull request. Also, please, please, please keep this checked. Allow edit by maintainers. This makes it so, let's say you missed a grammar mistake in a manual and the maintainer just wants to tweak it themselves before they push it. Unchecking this would make it so that's not possible, and they would need to like either close the pull request and force you to reopen it or fix it yourself, which is a lot more tedious than it needs to be. So always keep this on. I'm not going to press this button because I'm a maintainer, so I'm just going to do that off stream. I did forget to mention, after you create the pull request, please, please, please do not edit the request afterward in any other way, as let's say you make a pull request and I'm just about to done reviewing it, and then you make another commit to said pull request. That means I gotta review it again, which is just very, very annoying. So please double, triple check that your pull request is, or rather you're done making commits before you make the pull request. If you really, really need to, either if you really want to change to be seen, either make a comment or just close the PR and then reopen it with the new changes. But that's pretty much it. Everything else is the same, regardless of requests that you do. You just bip it, do it, make a PR. Some are a little bit more intensive, such as LFAs. For example, like LFAs, for people who don't know, are basically ways to make the logs a little bit more lively, I guess. You can add images, SVGs, drop downs and stuff, and it makes it a little bit more digestible. Um, in that case, I would recommend PRs include images if possible, like examples of what it looks like, or logs of the manual. So, like for example, if I did Secret Santa and I use some test logs to make sure that I work correctly, I would include those logs into the PR description. And it works any other way. You upload files, you just take one and just put it in there. And, well, this is an SVG, but it will work regardless of a TXT file or whatnot. Um, that's just there just so um, the maintainer doesn't need to open up their game and test it themselves, especially if they don't know the mod. But yeah, if you want to see more tutorials like this, like KTANE wise, like for LFA, interactives, let me know. And if you have any other clarifying questions, just you can either write in the comment and I will probably get to it, but it's better to just join the server, go into Repo discussion, ping me, or just DM me. Okay. Goodbye.